You can do a lot in a lifetime if you don't burn out too fast. You can make the most of the distance. First, you need endurance. First, you've got to last. Those were the closing set of lyrics from Marathon, which was the fourth track on Canadian rock band Rush's 1985 album Power Windows. Lyrics by Neil Peart.
Welcome to the Stark Reflections on Writing and Publishing podcast. There has never been a better time for writers. More information, options, and opportunities are available to you, but navigating these requires insight. Join Mark Leslie Lefebvre as he draws upon more than a quarter century of experience as a writer, a bookseller, and a trusted book industry consultant to explore and reflect on the writing and publishing landscape to help you make informed choices on your writer journey.
Hello, Reflectives, and welcome to episode 119 of the Stark Reflections on Writing and Publishing podcast. This is your host, Mark Leslie Lefebvre. Well, I said that name kind of like William Shatner might say something. All right, back to seriousness. This is Mark, and I just got back from Colorado Springs, where I attended the 2020 Superstars Writing Seminars, and I was fortunate to leave this snow-covered, snowy Waterloo, Ontario, to go to a tropical, beachy, sunny, to go to a snow-covered, snowy Colorado Springs. All joking aside, Colorado Springs is an absolutely gorgeous place to be, no matter what time of year it is. So it was beautiful, snowy Colorado Springs, but what was more beautiful were the interactions and engagements with so many amazing people who are part of the Superstars Writing Seminars tribe. And this episode is going to be a reflection on just some of the many bits of wisdom that I brought back from Superstars. All it's going to be, because it's so hard to jam-pack everything that I'm still taking in, many days after I got back. I'm just going to select some of the things that I made notes of and I wanted to reflect on. But before we get to that, I'm going to do a bit of a personal update, and I am also going to share some recent comments from recent episodes. But first, before we do any of that, so let's hear a word from this episode's sponsor, Findaway Voices. If you're looking to get into audiobooks and you own the audiobook rights, you can use Findaway Voices to reach more than 43 retailer and library markets around the world. Not only that, but you can use Findaway Voices to set your own price on most of those markets, Audible being the one main exception that I can think of off the top of my head. But what this means is more control for you in terms of promotions for audiobooks, because apart from that platform, Findaway Voices has partnered with BookBub to create Chirp, which is an audio promotions platform. Now, if you have the rights to your audiobook, you can use Findaway Voices in the same way that you might use ACX, where you can use them to find a narrator to work with, and they have multiple options available. You can do royalty sharing with your narrator using Findaway Share, which instead of paying the narrator the full hourly rate that they normally go for, you pay 50% of that rate, and then they get a small cut of your share. No, it's not the free version that you get from ACX, but it does come with a lot of flexibility, including the ability to get out of that contract by buying out your narrator, should you choose to do so. It's just one of many ways that you can use Findaway Voices to either find a narrator, or if you already produce a professional quality audiobook yourself, you can upload it to Findaway Voices and use them to get into the retail and library market. And if you're looking for ways that you can use Findaway Voices as an author or small publisher, you can go check them out over at starkreflections.ca/Findaway. So in terms of a bit of a personal update, if you can potentially hear it, I came down with a bit of a cold. I started to get it towards the end of the last day when I was at Superstars. I guess enough late nights hanging out in the bar, chatting with people, getting 3 or 4 hours of sleep, and then going nonstop all day kind of did it for me. As I mentioned, I was not only at Superstars, I got a lot of time one-on-ones with authors. I got a lot of time on panels and presentations. And then even during the few hours break that I had on Saturday afternoon, I did a virtual chat with some folks in Lethbridge, Alberta for the WordBridge conference. Now, we did have some technical difficulties there, so it wasn't the full hour. It was about 45 minutes with some special support and help from my friend Robert J. Sawyer, who was in the front row, and he kind of took over as moderator because I couldn't hear people from the back of the room. So he was amazing at repeating the questions, etc. But that was a fun-filled 2 conferences in one weekend for me, which was amazing, and it kind of took a little bit out of me. I fortunately haven't actually been on my back at all. I haven't actually stopped. What I have been doing is I've been getting more than 6 hours sleep, which is good for my body. I normally get about 4 to 5 hours sleep per night, so that's been helping me recover. And this was something that a doctor who's now retired, Dr. Ford, had recommended to me when I was not when I was completely out with the flu and on my back, but when I was feeling down with a cold. He recommended exercise for the endorphins and the way that will stimulate and get the blood flowing. And because Liz and I are training for a 50K that we're going to be doing during the summer solstice, and I did miss out on a few days of running while I was in Colorado, although, running in Colorado was amazing. When I did it last year, you're more than a mile high. So altitude is thinner and it's harder for me to breathe. So normally when I can run at a relatively decent, like 6 miles an hour pace, I'm running probably at 4 or 3.5 miles an hour when I'm in a place like that. But I didn't end up having time to do running because of the schedule that I had. So when I got back, I had to do some extended runs. I had to do like a 12K. I had to do a number of runs. And it was amazing because as I'm on the treadmill, listening to some amazing podcasts, listening to some great audiobooks, because you're there for an extended amount of time, I was feeling better. Feeling almost like I didn't have a cold. And I love the way that you can do that. I wasn't pushing myself too hard. I was going relatively easy. But I absolutely love that. And so while you can still hear it a little bit in my voice, I'm hoping that it kind of goes away. I'm juicing up on lots of healthier food alternatives now that I'm home. And I am also getting the exercise because next week, Thursday the 20th, is when I'm flying out to Las Vegas to hang out with Dean Wesley Smith and Christine Catherine Rush, where I'm one of the editors on the WMG anthology projects. And of course, between now and then, I have just started, because I am a procrastinator. If you're a longtime listener, you remember how I got caught with my pants down when something had switched up last year, and I had only been reading just in time to keep up with the next day's readings. But I started last night, making myself comfortable, organizing things, and going through the anthology that I'm reading for, which is a Halloween-themed one, and I'm really excited about that. Well, it's not really Halloween-themed, it's fall-themed. Halloween's one of the big ones there. But I'm having a lot of fun with that, and I have scheduled myself basically a couple hours in the morning when I first get up, and then a few hours at night before I go to bed, so I can get through most of it. I'm hoping to be through about 80% of it by the time I land in Vegas on the 20th, and I'll be there for a week. But that means I haven't had a chance lately to do much writing, and I do have some writing I've done. I've done really, really short micro pieces. I did one for a brewery that's celebrating the 40th anniversary of an independent bookstore, and so I've done a couple pieces that I've submitted to them. The idea of having one of my micro stories printed on a beer bottle is kind of exciting for a beer nerd like me. And I have some projects on the way now. Personally, I got a chance to meet with Deanna Nipling and Jamie Ferguson. Jamie's been a guest on a previous episode of this podcast, and they're the editors of the amazing Monster Tales anthologies. And so I had a chance to have lunch with them one of the days when I was in Colorado. Jamie was attending the conference, and Deanna lives close by. So the three of us got together. It was a lot of fun. And they had inspired me to write Stowaway, which was a novella-length work. It's about 24,000 words, which continues the story of a Canadian werewolf in New York. It actually takes place between my novel, A Canadian Werewolf in New York, and the as-yet unfinished Fear and Longing in Los Angeles. And so it was great to get back into Michael Andrews and that world. And so in a forthcoming anthology, one of the themes is love, monsters in love. And what I realized is I hadn't yet done the meet cute, or the story of how Michael meets Gail, the love of his life, who they they're just friends at this point, of course, because in the story there's that tension between the two of them, where Michael really wants to be together with Gail, but Gail's not quite ready to get back into a relationship. And so I wanted to go back because in Werewolf in New York, I talk about how Michael and Gail meet and how they fell in love with one another, but I didn't get into it. So this is going to be fantastic for their anthology. I'm going to get an opportunity to write that short story. And it's great writing short stories because, as I mentioned in recent episodes, it was February 4th that Maddie Dalrymple and I released the book Taking the Short Tack, which was based on a previous episode of this podcast. Maddie had taken that and expanded upon it, and it was basically our look at how writers can use short fiction, basically in the many ways that I've recycled short fiction over the years, or resold stories from market to market. And it talks about translations, talks about different formats, talks about experimentations you can do with short fiction, as well as using fiction not just to earn additional revenue, but also as marketing tools. So I plan on taking this love story with Michael and Gail, and after it's when I get the rights back, after it's been in the anthology, I don't plan on doing anything with it other than making it available for people to sign up for my newsletter. Maybe they'll get a slightly expanded version of the story that they can't have gotten anywhere else. And that way I know that people signing up who come out of this time around a Canadian Werewolf short story that's a freebie, that if they want to understand how Gail and Michael meet, that maybe that's something they'd be interested in. Of course, I don't actually introduce Gail in the short story, so it would probably have to be people who finish the novel. See, I'm just kind of brainstorming without a script here, so you get to see the raw and slightly cold medicated Mark. Although, really, how different is the slightly cold medicated Mark from the regular Mark who just rambles on forever? But that's it for a bit of a personal update. Let's hear from some comments from some recent episodes. On episode 113, Taking the Short Tack with Maddie Dalrymple, I just recently was talking about the short fiction. Maddie actually left a comment, and she said, correction to a comment that I made in the podcast regarding Google Docs not having an equivalent of MS Word's track changes. Now, Maddie says that she discovered editing mode, which she says is a pencil icon in the upper right-hand corner, from which one can choose suggesting edits become suggestions. So this enables one contributor to review another contributor's changes and accept or reject them. Well, thank you, Maddie, for sharing that. That's really, really cool. I didn't even realize that much extra functionality existed in Google Docs. So great to know that there's those amazing other tools available. And there were also a couple of comments on episode 118, which was Wish I'd Known Then with Jamie Albright and Sarah Rosette. And the first comment was from Regina Clark, who said, that was totally enjoyable. Thanks, Regina. I appreciate you taking the time to share that. That's really, really awesome. And Amy Tasakata said, I don't write a lot of short fiction. I love knowing all the things and really diving deep into knowing a character, which is harder to do in short fiction, but really enjoyed your interview and will have to check out their podcast. She's referring to Sarah and Jamie's podcast, the Wish I'd Known Then podcast. And Amy ends that with saying, I met Jamie at the Smarter Artist Summit. She is so friendly. Yes, she is, Amy. That's where I met her for the first time. I'm pretty sure Jamie and I met for the first time at the Smarter Artist Summit. So awesome. Thank you for that comment, Amy. And over on Twitter, Vale Nagel said, I was listening to the last Stark Reflections where you talked about getting ready to go to Colorado and worrying about snow while actually shoveling the snow you were worried about for the fourth day in a row. Big grin. I hope your trip is warmer than my driveway. And then followed up with another tweet that said, I forgot to get snow tires on my car this year because Denver snow tends to be a one-day affair, and then the roads melt off by noon the next day. But this week, I got stuck at home writing for 5 days. Bad news, the coffee ran out on day 2. Good news, I finished another novel. That's awesome, Vale. I mean, not that you ran out of coffee, because that's kind of a bit of a nightmare for me. But so awesome that being snowed in, even without coffee, that you actually finished another novel. That is progression. That's dedication. That is commitment. Thanks, Vale, for those comments on Twitter. And if you want to leave a comment on an episode of the Stark Reflections podcast, you can head on over to starkreflections.ca, leave a comment there. I believe I have a giveaway from a previous episode, if I can't remember it correctly. If not, there are more coming up. And there actually is a giveaway of an amazing coupon code if you stay tuned to the end of this episode. And it's for everyone, not just for people who leave comments. But if you want to leave a comment, leave one over at starkreflections.ca, or you can at me at Twitter. I'm at Mark Leslie. Well, that's it for the comments and the personal updates. Let's get right on to the, what were we calling this? We're going to call it the Super Reflections of Superstars Writing Seminars 2020. As I mentioned, this episode is going to be from Superstars Writing Seminars. As of the February 2020 Superstars, that would have been my 8th time attending as a guest instructor. And I've been honored to be a part of the Superstars Writing Seminars family for so long. It really truly is a homecoming. It really is truly getting together with like-minded individuals. And here's what I love about a place like this is, regardless of our personal beliefs, regardless of our religious beliefs, political beliefs, etc., Superstars is a place where we don't discuss those things. We discuss the craft of writing. We discuss the business of writing and publishing. And it's focusing on supporting one another and being there for one another, because we're all in this together. And Kevin J. Anderson opened up the session by doing a talk on the perfect storm for indie publishing. And it was great because he talked about the history of publishing and what was going on and all the changes that were going on at the same time that this digital movement was coming up. And it was this really inspiring overview of how authors like Kevin and several of the other instructors who have been in the writing business for a long, long time, traditionally published through New York publishers, how they had managed to learn and continue to embrace the spirit of fulfilling the reader's needs, not necessarily through a publishing house in New York, but just through focusing on the reader's needs. And so Kevin's the perfect example of hybrid author who works with many different publishers very well. He gets along well with them. He meets his deadlines. He's a professional. He's a consummate professional. And he's producing nonstop with major publishers, but he's also doing independent stuff. So that's allowing him the ability to, he is a very prolific writer and he writes a lot. He writes while dictating. And I did promise I would have Kevin on a future episode. We didn't get a chance to do an in-person interview when I was there, but I do want to talk a little bit about the way he dictates, as well as so many of the things that he's seen because he's been in the industry for a long, long time. But I got on a bit of a sidetrack there. But I think that's what I love about Superstars is it's the inclusiveness. It's the embracing. You could be yourself at Superstars. Everyone was accepted no matter where they were in their publishing journey, no matter how they decided to publish. If they're looking to find an agent or an editor, or they're looking to indie publish, nobody's passing judgment. They're allowing people to take their own paths. And I love that about the inclusivity of Superstars. Of course, Kevin and I go way back. When we get together, we have to make sure we put some time aside for craft beer, which we did, and it was quite fun and it was awesome. But it's also a time to be with so many other writers, and I love the fact that every year I get a chance to chat with new people that I haven't had a chance to chat with. And the only sad thing is that there were more people that I wanted to talk to, but I didn't get a chance to hang out with. But it's always an amazing experience. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to reflect on just a few things. There's so many things going on, so many amazing conversations. These are just a few things from some of the notes that I had scribbled down. Now, the first one is from a panel on success that I attended. And I did write down a little bit more, but I pulled and I selected some things from 5 of the panelists on that success panel. And I'm going to read them, and then I'm going to sort of reflect on them all in general, just to summarize. So Nick Thacker had said, you can be successful at multiple levels. And on top of that, Michael Anderle said, my mountain to success is not the same as your mountain to success. He also said, what is your definition of success today versus other days? Because it can change. Also, he had said, you can get to 6 and 7 figures, but you might have to sacrifice other things in order to get there, which kind of led Brian Meeks to saying, figure out what you want to do that makes you happy. And Brian said, there are things that I choose not to do, even though it could lead to different kinds of success, because I want to be happy. Cremin said, celebrate all the wins, all of them, even if they're the small wins, because we often forget to celebrate those wins. And Kevin Ikenberry said, your goals are going to move, they're going to shift, they're going to change. And he used an example of determining that he was not going to write any short fiction. He was going to focus on longer projects. Then all of a sudden, Kevin J. Anderson said, hey, let's co-write a story together. And of course, Kevin's going to go, well, this is an opportunity I can't say no to because of working with somebody like Kevin, but also the potential exposure that story is going to get. So thinking about these sorts of things of success, and I want to start with what Tara said. We fail often to celebrate all of the little wins, all of the little victories that we have in our life. A victory could be that you actually sat down and wrote 10 words. That can be a victory, particularly if it's something you've been struggling to get to for a long, long time. So a victory doesn't mean #1 New York Times best-selling author or, 6 figures this month or this year from your writing, or looking at the dashboard and seeing your author ranking or any of that. It's all of the little victories that can help you. And it's a mindset. It's fantastic. I love what Brian talked about. And this kind of goes back to what Michael had said about, yeah, you can get there, but you may have to sacrifice things. You may have to sacrifice things in your personal life, sacrifice TV, sacrifice all those other things that are valuable and important to you because you're focusing on that one goal. And leading back to Brian saying, sometimes he can see that there's something that he could do and he knows he'll achieve whatever by doing it. But he doesn't want to do that because that may not make him happy. So it kind of leads back to this ongoing debate of right to market versus right to passion. And it's almost like you're looking at a Venn diagram and you're combining the, what the market will bear and what is interesting with what you're passionate about and seeing if you can get a crossover for those things. And Nick Thacker talking about success at multiple levels. It comes back to something I've long said is, what is success to you? How do you define success? Is success 1 million readers? Is it $1 million? It is 1 million 5-star reviews. There's so many different ways. For many people, success is actually finishing that story, actually writing the end, finishing that novel, writing the end, publishing that story, publishing that novel, getting one reader, someone they don't know and have never met before, to review it or to contact them and say, thank you, this story you wrote made a difference. Those are huge, huge victories, and we don't give enough credit for them. And then, of course, your goals are going to move and they're going to change. There are things that you're going to have to adapt to. And this is something that, Michael and Kevin talk about. And they may be different. Your initial goal might be to achieve a certain level, but then once you attain that, what's your next goal? And you can break it down. It doesn't have to all be a 20-year plan. It can be, what am I going to try to get done this week? What am I going to try to get done this month? And so, for example, when I shared in an earlier episode in January of this year, when I talked about my goals for 2019, I looked at the 16 goals or whatever that I had made and said, well, I only achieved 9 of them. So, it looks like a failure or whatever. Maybe I only achieved 3 of them. It was some silly number. But then when I looked at all the other things that I did that weren't on my initial goal list, those were new goals that I added as the year went on. And I could have beat myself up about that, or I could have celebrated what I actually got done. So those are just some of my reflections on some of the things that were said during this phenomenal panel. But I want to go over to something that Rebecca Moesta said, and Rebecca is one of the founders of Superstars Writing Seminar. She is the wind beneath Kevin J. Anderson's wings. She is also one of the most amazing editors I've had the privilege of working with, and she is a fantastic writer as well. Now, Rebecca said, and I think Rebecca and Kevin were talking about professionalism on a joint panel that they were doing, or a joint presentation that her and Kevin were doing. And she reminded authors of something really, really interesting. And it's about having a professional bio, etc. But she said, keep track of all the unique and interesting things about you, even if they have nothing to do with writing, because these can be great for bios, for media interviews, etc. And one of the examples that Rebecca used is the fact that Kevin has climbed every particular peak more than 14,000 feet or 11,000 feet or something in the state of Colorado. It's an interesting, fascinating point about him as a writer. Now, he often dictates while on those hikes, and that's how he does his writing, so it is related to writing, but it's also an interesting fact about you. And this can be used for a hook, that could be used for bios, for media, for whatever, and the hook could be dependent upon. So maybe that's a hook that's interesting to an outdoor magazine about Colorado Springs, about how different people enjoy the outdoors, and then it happens to be not really about Kevin's writing, but just about that other thing that he did. So think about all of those things, all of those interesting things. You're at a party. Yeah, of course, it's easy enough to say, well, I'm an author and this is what I write. But what is some other interesting or bizarre thing that somebody might not know about you? And that can be something that can lead off into an interesting discussion or topic. And that's something that you can use in your bio as a writer as well, because it's not just, Mark lives in Waterloo, Ontario with 4 animals and his beloved and his son. It's not necessarily something like that, but it can be Mark travels with a life-size skeleton named Barnaby Bones. Well, that's a little bit more interesting. And every time people find out about my skeleton Barnaby, it kicks off a discussion. Hey, my skeletons and my skulls got me on a television morning program because somebody saw a picture of me with a whole bunch of skulls. So that, again, yeah, the skulls are related to what I do and what I write and the macabre stuff that I do. But again, it's an interesting thing. So this little tidbit that Rebecca shared, it's a small thing, but it's something that can lead to a lot of amazing things. One other reflection was James Owen, who does this amazing Drawing Out the Dragons presentation every year. Well, he actually did not do it last year. He did a different presentation, but he came back and did Drawing Out the Dragons again. And this reflection wasn't from Drawing Out the Dragons, although I could do entire episodes on that. And I think I have mentioned it in the past. But I was on a panel with James, and he had mentioned that Drawing Out the Dragons was funded on Kickstarter. So he wanted to do a hardcover version of Drawing Out the Dragons with a couple other books on a similar theme. And he said that the massive goal that he was looking for in order to produce the hardcover version of Drawing Out the Dragons, and this was several years ago, before that technology was easy to do, it was funded on Kickstarter by only 137 patrons. Only 137 patrons were able to fund this dream. 137 people that believed in him enough to get behind him and say, yes, I want to see this project happen. We often talk about Kevin Kelly and the 1,000 true fans, and the idea that to have a sustainable career as an artist, all you need is 1,000 true fans who are willing to purchase everything you do. I actually talk about that in the 7 P's of publishing success. And I say, well, okay, if it's an ebook, well, 1,000 true fans isn't going to get you there unless you're selling products $20 or $30 rather than $5. But this is fascinating that when people believe enough in you, that you don't really need that many. So think about yourself. Think about your own mailing list. If you're beating yourself up because you don't have 10,000 plus people on your mailing list, but you only have 137, well, those are 137 people that most likely signed up because they care about you and they're interested in what you're doing as a writer. And James was able to fund a massive Kickstarter project with only 137 patrons supporting it. And that's an important and critical reflection, because most people would look at a number like 137 and go, well, that's nice, but it's not enough. Yeah, it is enough when the people believe in you and when they see that you believe in yourself as well, which is, again, part of the ongoing messages that James shares. Well, that's it for the reflections. I do want to end with the fact that leading up to Superstars writing seminars and towards the end of it, Kevin J. Anderson had been sharing on the closed Superstars Writing Seminars Facebook group. He'd been sharing inspirational quotes from his dear, dear friend Neil Peart, who was the drummer for Rush, who died earlier this year, sadly. And I did reflect on that in an episode. Thanks for the inspiration, Neil Peart. But Kevin and Neil were actually really, really good friends. And so this has been a really, really hard thing for him. But I have to admire the fact that no matter how much it hurt, no matter how difficult it has been, Kevin has been taking his love and passion for the beautiful songs and the beautiful lyrics that Neil has written, and he's been using that to help inspire other writers. He's taking his own grief, he's taking the own tragedy that he has befallen, and he's using that to inspire other people. And so the quote that I opened this episode with was a Rush quote. And it was something Kevin had shared this morning on Thursday, February 13th, 2020. He shared those lyrics from the song Marathon. Again, yet another song from Rush that I absolutely adored. And so I used them at the beginning of this episode. And I want to talk a little bit about that because I think the concept of marathon is critical for us when we think about our goals and our success as writers. And while the lyrics of the song, well, they depict the actual sentiment of running a marathon, and so there's a lot of imagery in the song about that. It was meant as a metaphor for life, of all of those obstacles that life throws at you along the way, and it's about achieving one's personal goals. And so I like to think, when I think about marathon, I think of it as the finishing the novel, but not just finishing the novel, but all of those writing projects in the long run that you're going to be doing, a long-term process. Now, in a 1986 interview, Neil Peart had said that marathon is, and I quote, about the triumph of time and a kind of message to myself because I think life is too short for all the things that I want to do. He then goes on to say, you can do a lot. Just don't burn yourself out too fast trying to do everything at once. Marathon is a song about individual goals and trying to achieve them. And, he says, it's also about the old Chinese proverb, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step. So, as we close out this episode, I'm going to go listen to the song Marathon by Rush one more time, and I'm going to think about that. Well, I'm going to be listening to it because later on today I have to run another 6K. So I'm going to be thinking about the song while I'm on the treadmill and trying to get to my goal, but I'm going to think about it in terms of the things I have planned for my own writing over the next little while. What is it that you're going to do when you're thinking about something like Marathon and you're thinking about the long run and you're thinking about where you want to be and those goals? Yes, go ahead and celebrate those milestones you've already passed. Go and celebrate every little victory, every single step that you take. Because when you come back to that journey, every single step that you take moving forward, learning more about the craft of writing, practicing the craft, learning more about the business of writing, reflecting on those things along the way. Each of those steps are cumulative and help get you closer towards that goal. Hang in there. You've got this. You can do it. One writing step at a time. Well, that's it for the reflection for this episode. And as mentioned earlier, I wanted to offer you, the listener, an opportunity if you're interested in attending Superstar's writing seminars in February of 2021. I have a special coupon code that'll get you $100 off. This coupon code doesn't expire. You can use it all the way up until registration is over. The coupon code is MARK, M-A-R-K, 9776, and Mark is all in uppercase. You can go to starkreflections.ca, and for episode 119, there's a special link that actually has the code embedded in it. It'll automatically apply the $100 off for your registration, and that happens after checkout. So what you'll do is if you click on the link, you'll see that it takes the $100 off. If you don't use my link, but you actually go to Superstar's registration, and then under the ambassador code, you type in Mark 9776, it'll then pop up and say $100 discount applied, and that'll actually get applied when you go to checkout. Again, this is a conference I'm a little bit biased towards because I've been going to it for 8 years, but I'm excited that there is a coupon code if you're interested to get you $100 off. Well, that's it for episode 119 of the Stark Reflections podcast. Again, this is your host, Mark Leslie Lefebvre. If you were in attendance at Superstars 2020, please do share in the comments something that you learned, something that you gleaned, maybe a reflection of your own from that 2020 Superstars writing seminars, or have you attended another recent conference? What was something that you gleaned? What was something that you learned from being there in person and taking it all in. I'd love to hear about that, and I will read comments on a future episode of the podcast. You can subscribe to the podcast through the RSS feed if you haven't already. If you are enjoying the podcast, please feel free to leave a review on the podcatcher of your choice. It should be available via all of the platforms. Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. One of the ways that you can help me is you can share this podcast with a friend that you think would find it valuable. You can also get involved if you wanted to be a patron supporter. And this podcast will always be free, but there are patrons who support this podcast for $1, $3, or $5 a month. And patrons get opportunities to win more great prizes on top of the prizes available to people who comment on certain episodes. They also get access to additional podcast episodes. I do podcast episodes on reflections on other podcasts because I do listen to so many other ones, and they often make me think about really cool things that I think would be applicable to writers, and as well additional other audio content. Some of my previous audiobooks and previews of them before they're available are made available to my awesome patrons, and you can check that out if you're interested over at patreon.com/starkreflections. But thanks again for listening to this episode. This is Mark Leslie Lefebvre. So until next week and episode 120, here's wishing you great writing and good Stark Reflections.
Thank you for listening to the Stark Reflections podcast. You can find show notes for each episode at starkreflections.ca.
The music for this podcast, Laser Groove, was composed and produced by Kevin MacLeod. Check out more of Kevin's great music at incomptech.com.